They were burned, flayed, torn apart, and they never screamed for mercy. These saints faced the most terrifying tortures in human history and died with faith on their lips. "Turn me over, this side is done." These chilling words, attributed to a man being slowly roasted alive, have echoed through history. Were they a grim joke, a final act of defiance, or a statement of unshakable faith? This is the story of Saint Lawrence, whose death by fire became one of the most unforgettable martyrdoms in early Christianity. It was the year 258 AD. The Roman Empire was under severe strain. Emperor Valerian issued an edict. All Christian clergy were to be executed, and the church's wealth seized. Christians, seen as threats to Rome's gods and traditions, became targets of persecution. Lawrence, the Archdeacon of Rome, was tasked with managing the church's resources and caring for the poor. When Roman officials demanded he hand over all the church's treasures, he asked for 3 days. But what he presented wasn't gold or jewels. It was the poor, the sick, the disabled. These, he declared, are the true treasures of the church. The authorities were enraged. Rather than a swift execution, they sentenced him to a brutal death. Lawrence was bound to an iron grid and roasted over burning coals. While accounts of his death vary, early church leaders like Ambrose of Milan affirm the method of execution. It's said that in the midst of his suffering, Lawrence quipped, "It is cooked, turn me over and eat," an expression of courage that lives on in Christian tradition. Whether those words were ever spoken or later legend, what's clear is that his execution was meant to intimidate. Roasting a man alive wasn't common. It was meant to terrify anyone who defied Rome. But it backfired. Lawrence's death became a powerful symbol. His tomb in the catacombs of Chieriaca became a sacred site, and later a grand basilica, San Lorenzo fuori le mura, was built in his honor. The fire that was meant to destroy him instead became a beacon for believers. Flayed for faith, the agony of St. Bartholomew. What happens when pain goes beyond the physical, when even suffering becomes a message of faith? For St. Bartholomew, one of the 12 apostles, his death came through one of the cruelest tortures recorded. He was skinned alive. Bartholomew's final mission led him far from Roman Judea, possibly through Mesopotamia, India, and Armenia. In Armenia, his teachings gained traction and drew the wrath of local rulers. Tradition says King Astyages, angered by his brother's conversion, had Bartholomew arrested. He was beaten, condemned, and flayed alive, a punishment not just of pain, but of erasure. Unlike crucifixion, flaying was intended to strip away identity, literally and symbolically. Yet Christian sources like the Golden Legend say Bartholomew remained faithful throughout the torture, praising God even as his skin was removed. Artists have immortalized this image, Bartholomew calmly holding his own skin in Michelangelo's Last Judgment. After his death, some say he was also beheaded, his remains were recovered and enshrined. His relics were moved to Lipari, then Benevento, and finally Rome, where the Church of San Bartolomeo all'Isola now stands. Though his flesh was torn, his faith became his enduring legacy. Torn by horses, the death of Saint Hippolytus. How does a loyal Roman become an enemy of the empire? Saint Hippolytus, once aligned with imperial authority, and even a critic of the church, met one of the most brutal deaths remembered in Christian history. Hippolytus was a prominent theologian during the 3rd century, a time of division within Christianity and hostility from Rome. He opposed the Bishop of Rome over matters of doctrine and discipline, making him a controversial figure. But everything changed under Emperor Maximinus Thrax, who launched an aggressive campaign against Christians. Both Hippolytus and Pope Pontian were arrested and sent to the mines of Sardinia, a near-death sentence. There, the two reconciled before being executed. Tradition holds that Hippolytus was tied to wild horses and dragged to death over rocky terrain, a punishment designed to mutilate the body and send a message of terror. While historical confirmation is thin, the symbolism remains powerful. A man who had once stood apart from the church was, in the end, broken by the empire he once served, and sanctified by the very church he had opposed. His tomb became a place of reverence, and church fathers like Jerome honored him as both a theologian and martyr. His writings, including Refutation of All Heresies, remain key sources on early Christian beliefs. The trial by wheel, St. George's ordeal. St. George is best known as a dragon-slaying knight, but behind the legend lies a man who suffered immense torture for his faith. His story, deeply rooted in Christian tradition, reveals the violent backlash faced by believers in the Roman Empire. George lived during the reign of Emperor Diocletian in the early 4th century, a time of brutal persecution. A high-ranking soldier and devout Christian, George refused to renounce his faith when Diocletian demanded it of all Christian soldiers. Declaring his belief before the imperial court, George was arrested. According to medieval hagiographies, including the Passion of St. George, he faced horrific tortures. Among them was the torture wheel, a device rigged with blades and spikes, used to rip the body apart as it rotated. He was also said to be scourged, forced to drink poison, exposed to molten lead, and miraculously healed multiple times, before ultimately being beheaded in Nicomedia around April 23, 303 AD. While some details are likely embellished, the core remains. George stood firm in the face of unbearable suffering. His relics were scattered across the Christian world, and his name became synonymous with bravery. He became the patron saint of soldiers, representing both spiritual and physical courage. Silenced but not broken. The Martyrdom of Saint Agatha. What happens when your voice is taken but your message lives on? For Saint Agatha of Sicily, her torture was not only about breaking her body, but silencing her faith. Born to a noble Christian family in 3rd century Catania, Agatha was known for her beauty, intellect, and devotion to chastity. But when she rejected the advances of Quintianus, a Roman governor, she became a target. Furious at her refusal and her faith, he ordered her imprisonment. According to the Passio Sanctae Agathae, Agatha was subjected to a series of horrors. First placed in a brothel, then beaten, mutilated, and tortured with iron tools. When she still refused to renounce her faith, her tongue was torn out, an attempt to destroy her voice, her identity, and her message. Yet tradition holds that even without her tongue, she continued to proclaim her faith, aided by a miraculous vision of St. Peter who healed her wounds. She later succumbed to her injuries, dying in 251 AD under Emperor Decius's persecution. Agatha's tomb became a revered pilgrimage site. One of her most famous miracles was said to be the diversion of a lava flow from Mount Etna, which stopped when locals carried her veil toward the eruption. Her severed tongue, once a symbol of silencing, became proof that no force, not even death, could stop her witness. These martyrdoms, Lawrence roasted, Bartholomew flayed, Hippolytus torn apart, George tortured, Agatha mutilated, each reflect the raw tension between conviction and control, faith and empire. The Roman authorities meant to destroy these individuals, but instead, their suffering became testimony. Their deaths were not the end. They were the beginning of stories passed down for centuries. These weren't just tales of agony. They were declarations. As Tertullian once wrote, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." In fire, flaying, and silence, these saints sowed belief that no empire could burn away. If you thought the medieval torture was brutal, wait until you hear what the saints endured. Like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that history tried to bury.